Day 335 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine, and as always we'll head over to the Russian military losses as we continue to take a look at the exhaustion of the Russian forces. And currently Russia is sitting on 122,170 Russian military personnel losses, which represents an additional 690 losses in the past 24 hours. Now we'll take a quick peek at the hardware losses. So 2 tanks, 8 APCs, 2 artillery, few bits and pieces there, but a whole lot of aircraft. So 2 jets and 4 helicopters. Literally 100 million US dollars worth of equipment right there for the aircraft alone. Now, some of this info is quite fresh. All I know so far is that 3 of the helicopters were the Russian Ka-52 attack helicopter variants, also known as the Alligator. Then we'll move across back to the map and we'll start out a little bit north of Moscow in Russia today, where at one of Russian President Vladimir Putin's private home residences in Lake Valdai, just northeast of Moscow City, about 2 hours drive, maybe about 15 minutes by private jet for Putin, has reportedly now had a Pantsir S-1 air defense system installed, according to locals there. Now, this outrageously luxurious home is yet another example of Putin's palace that was kept under wraps for the longest time until late last year or so when it was found out about. So for a guy that earns a ruble salary that is roughly equivalent to 120,000 US dollars annually, he certainly continues to show his unimaginable wealth. But in reality, it's just yet another mark of a dodgy, corrupt, autocratic leadership that masquerades around as a democracy. Oh, and I said dodgy, so in the King's English that would mean suspicious or questionable. But my North American comrades, let me know your awareness of that slang, I suppose. Then we'll move across back to the Ukrainian map. We'll start out in the Donbass again, so just up the north, well, northish really. We're talking about Crimea. So just south of Crimea, progress is steady for the AFU, but the forest is dense and fighting occurs every 50 to 100 yards or so. So that is to say the Ukrainian forces are making small incremental gains or pushes forward, but then re-engaging in battle pretty shortly thereafter those gains. Oh, and nearby, Russian sources just claimed that the AFU forces took some ground north of Bilorivka, near a water pumping station there. But we already knew about this from weeks ago. Far out, Russia, quick to make a claim of victory, but slow, very slow to claim a loss. Then we'll move a little bit further south in the Donbass to Solidar. So if you regularly watch these videos, you might have seen one from 1 or 2 weeks ago where I was harping on about a river being sort of a demarcation point for the Russian army. So if we'll zoom in, you can pretty much see that west of Solidar. Now, this is either the biggest coincidence in the world, or Russia just simply have trouble crossing these things. So anyway, like I said previously, the existence of said river will, in the least, very likely slow down Russian forces, as you can clearly see that it has, based on that line, that river, that demarcation point there that they're forced to abide by almost. But as with every other place on the map, it's not overselling it to say that Russia has some real problems crossing these and many other rivers. Because there's only a few entry or exit points across the rivers. So you can see that there. In fact, it's hard to find any decent ones here. See that? See, I'm scrolling down and you can see there's one across there, but there's really not that many. So as an army, you really have to start thinking in logistical terms, for both sides actually. For example, the Russian army has to figure out how to adequately supply their forces through these river bridge choke points, if you will, at a decent rate, which is quite difficult for them to do. And we all saw what happened in Kherson, and Russia got the North Bank early on in the war, but Ukrainian forces then took out the bridge choke points. As a result, trapping a bunch of Russian forces on the north without supplies until eventually they had to withdraw. See, they can't really support their war efforts without the supply lines. Whereas the Ukrainian army, in a situation like this in Solidar, well, all they need is a little short distance firepower, like artillery, to take out those choke point bridges. I'm not even talking about high precision HIMARS, GLMRS missiles, as so many simpler weapons platforms and therefore cheaper munitions could easily take out these very few bridges, choke points that exist that Russia would otherwise want to use very much. So the moral of the story is, if you're going to invade a country, you need to be more technologically advanced, because you're going to come up against all sorts of issues with the terrain and natural obstacles, so it's just not something that can be avoided. But on the other hand, Ukraine has the tech. You might remember these NATO bridge layers that Ukraine received about 6 months ago or so. But the Russian army isn't as advanced as we had expected. And that technological disparity will only get wider and wider as the conflict continues. And let's see. So, I mean, to be fair, I make no claims or guaranteed claims that Russia won't cross this river. It's actually a pretty small width river as far as rivers go. It's probably frozen over right now, but might still then feel a bit risky to pass through. But even if they do cross it, they'll just inevitably come across a bigger river or a larger land obstacle or higher ground to contend with. Literally an uphill battle, and so much more. Then we'll scoot down a bit. Again, I've been harping on about that one, so Solidar. So Bakhmut. Now, Russian forces continue to put pressure on all sides, but the situation is otherwise largely unchanged. Now, in fact, I just skipped it, but just north of it in Krasnohora, Russian forces have been halted there as well. So it's a peculiar frontline shape, but if you use the satellite, you'll notice that it's not all empty, some flat, wide open land that Russia can just roll into, but instead a lot of residential locations, which slows down any advance. Then I'll just switch back to topographical, and perhaps the most difficult situation around here right now would be Klishkivka, where the Russian forces are attempting to storm positions day and night on the mostly on the fortified hills as you go up there, where the Ukrainian forces are stationed. But certainly some tough battles there right now. Then also in the region in the Donbass, so the AFU struck a Russian position at Iliophyusk. So this one is sort of southeast of Makivka. So we'll zoom out and zoom in. So here it is right there. It's now, let's see, so early reports mentioned heavy explosions, perhaps supply line or ammo dumps related on the Russian side, but we'll get more updates on that one later, I'm quite sure. Then we'll move across to Marinka, where quite the front line here. So a number of frontline Russian soldiers with their Russian S-24 SPG, basically the howitzer on wheels, were taken out pretty much at the front line in Marinka. Now, this is the before shot, for which I am unable to or allowed to show on this platform the after shot. Because they're taken out. But my bigger concern here is why an SPG is even positioned so close to the front lines anyway. It's not a tank. It should be positioned at least several more miles behind the front lines in order to provide long-range artillery support while minimizing its exposure to direct enemy fire, which is exactly what ended up happening in this case. Then we'll move across to the Kherson Oblast here today. Now, the Ukrainian General Staff has advised that Russia has sent Russian soldier reinforcements to the Kherson Oblast. He also mentioned that they arrived about 5 miles west of Brylivka, somewhere right, in fact, exactly right here. He also mentioned that they're equipped with just small arms and some bulletproof vests, but no heavy hidden military equipment arrived with them. Oh, and also in this area, Ukrainian forces sunk a boat in about the last 24 to 36 hours. So it was a Russian sabotage soldiers attempting to cross the Dnipro and land on a delta island nearby southwest of Kherson City. So I believe it was this one here, around the river, I should say. But they didn't do their due diligence or analysis of the situational threat that faced them, so the boat sunk after being fired upon, of course. Then let's take another look at the map. So there was some loud explosions reported in Sevastopol recently. So it looks like the Ukrainian forces are continuing to send small cheap drones to the Russian-occupied Crimean Peninsula just to test out the air defenses pretty much almost non-stop. Then just lastly on the map today, so here we have an echelon of US Bradley M2s recently headed east to Ukraine. Now the US can supply far more of these than we see here, even without manufacturing new ones. From memory, I think they had about 6,000 in stock, which reminds me of how Russia has no chance against the Western manufacturing and production capacities. Not to mention, Russia should have done some analysis before going to war with the West to determine who actually provides them with their key high-tech military component supplies, which, as it turns out, is also the West. Now, you might say they might just go and look to China, their partial ally. Well, no country makes everything, and same goes for China, in fact. They have to import a lot of high-end Western tech, and in some cases are blocked from getting some of their own high-tech silicon sugar from the West too. So that's the global supply chain. It can live without one nation, but no one nation can live without it. Then we'll move across to some news for today. So Poland will start teaching Ukrainian tank crews how to operate the Leopard 2 tanks. And this will happen within a few days, despite the fact that tanks haven't been transferred yet, these tanks to Ukraine. Now, currently, Germany, the producer of the tanks, is hiding behind their export license rules for other country operators of the tank to send them to other countries. But Poland is pretty adamant that it will find a way to supply the tanks if Germany continues to hold up the deal for too long. So one way or another, it just seems to be a matter of time now. And down the line, if all goes even partially to plan, Ukraine is expected to receive 100 Leopard 2 tanks from 12 different European countries, mostly European at least. So it's a fair number, and hopefully they start to receive them in soon. Then in some other news, Finland froze 187 million euros worth of Russian assets in their physical control there. So this happens a lot. It's quite good because it means one way or another, Russia will pay for its invasion onto Ukrainian soil. There's already been billions of Russian assets frozen, globally speaking, and billions more will surely follow. Then in some other news, a big event will happen in Turkey on February the 22nd to celebrate the first year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, according to the leader of the European delegation to Turkey. So for Turkey to host an event like this, which is loaded with meaning and support for Ukraine, it just continues to show that the previous fence sitter that was Turkey has really been coming out more and more in defense of Ukraine. So they told Russia to pull out of Ukraine about 6 months ago. Then they said Crimea is Ukraine about 4 months ago. They provided not just the Bayraktars, but they also provided some high precision offensive strike missile and platforms capabilities themselves just a couple of months ago. So getting pretty pro-Western, if you ask me. Then in some other somewhat related news, guess who else is coming out in support of Ukraine? North African country Morocco, who are sending a decent sum of their T-72B tanks to Ukraine. The first 20 were sent last week, in fact, and a further yet-to-be-disclosed amount will also soon get sent through. And all in all, Morocco has 296 T-72 tanks of varying types. I think there's a T-72, a T-72B, which Ukraine's getting, and a T-72BK. Then in a bit of a quick Russian mobilization blunder, so this leaked document shows a Russian university that is meant to police the situation for any students who are in reserve and subject to conscription, and for them to appear at a specific location on campus between February the 1st to March the 15th and ensure that they are not missed and shipped off to war, basically. And it's not uncommon for outside agencies, or in this case a school, to be forced to carry out Russia's dirty work for them. You see, Russia's resources are stretched on the battlefield, and they're also stretched internally too. Then in another quick mobilization blunder, so hopefully not too boring, all these documents and sheets. So the next one, this is a Russian court ruling with a lot of legal technobabble here that shows Russian fathers of 3+ children still have a right not to be mobilized, even though they recently lost that right. But the father has to lodge some deferment papers from this point onwards to avoid the call-up, which will absolutely get lost in the mail, and they are mobics now. So classic Russia, using war to erode civil liberties. Actually, slip of the tongue there. I meant to say classic Russia using the law to erode civil liberties, but war definitely works too. Then in a bit of a quick funny to round it all off with today, guys, so, well, I tend to find this one unusually bizarre or funny, so more Russian talk show and politician guests are just saying quite bizarre things, like this gentleman saying, Russia today is in the most stable state it has ever been in all of post-war history. Oh, and then he backtracks quickly, saying except for the 10 years after World War II, but really, Russia? Really? The most stable? You're actually the most economically sanctioned country on Earth now due to your Ukrainian faux pas. Plus, 300,000 able-bodied Russian men left the country the very same week they were expecting to be mobilized last September. I mean, I haven't even touched the surface of this list. But I'd actually go as far as to say that Russia is the most unstable country in its post-war history. Plus, they're lying about that too. It doesn't make sense because they're still lying about not being in a war. But anyhow, I don't really care if they choose to lie at this point because they're also lying to themselves, putting themselves in this perpetual information vacuum whereby the higher up political elite, to be honest, sometimes make the dumbest decisions imaginable in that information vacuum of a fantasy land. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks for watching. Please leave a comment, subscribe, hit that like button, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.